Hello, and welcome back to Humanity First. Today we'll have kind of like a shorter episode, but I wanted to tackle one aspect of um, a larger video that I was actually working on. I was writing the script for a reply kind of to Dario Amadei's recent essay, where he talks about the dangers of artificial intelligence. The essay is The Adolescence of Technology, and it really is the second part to his first essay, which is Machines of Love and Grace, about the potential, the positive future, his vision for the positive future that we can have if development of artificial intelligence goes well. So this is like the second part. It's the cautionary tale. It's the dangers and pointing out potential pitfalls that he sees on our path to developing this technology. And I have many points of conflict with Dario, many points at which I disagree with certain things that he says. And I'll talk about those more at length in the future. Both disagreements about some arguments that he makes, and also disagreements about his overall strategy. Because as we kind of discussed a few episodes ago now, even if there was a perfect, even if there was a solution to this problem, even if there was a way to align these AI models to impose some safety guardrails that would hold up as these models continue to get more and more advanced, even if that was possible, still the actual social pressures and forces that are molding the development of this technology might still lead us towards a dangerous outcome for the world, even if there was a solution, a perfect solution that was there, that was obtainable. But anyways, setting that aside, I wanted to talk about one aspect of his article today, because he talks about the dangers of developing biological weapons. And the argument kind of goes like this. There exists today in the world a certain proportion of the population that is able, and possibly you can also add has the resources to develop a biological weapon if they really wanted to, develop some sort of dangerous virus or pathogen if they really wanted to. And the argument is that as you get more and more powerful artificial intelligence, then that barrier to entry, that group that can actually develop something that is dangerous like that, begins to expand more and more. And so if you have more people, I mean, in the worst case, if you have everyone can develop a very dangerous and lethal bioweapon, then you're increasing, obviously, the chance that you have a psychopath or some disgruntled individual or a terrorist organization that will be able to develop and unleash this unleash a really dangerous pathogen on the world that can cause a lot of harm and a lot of death. So that's something that Anthropic, and I also heard other labs are testing for. They're testing for how models are able to assist non-experts to develop these dangerous pathogens. And I would include this in a class of risks. So one can kind of distinguish between two types of risks when you're developing this technology. There is the risks that come from autonomy, because you have some autonomous agent and it pursuing its own preferences, its own goals, and it leads to some disaster. That's one class of risks, and it's risks that arise from the technology itself. And then there are a second class of risks, which are risks from human misuse. So this can be at the level of governments, that one government can use this technology to oppress its own people, or to oppress or harm other countries, other nations. Or it can be at the level of the company. So like one company can use this technology to maybe concentrate power and resources to itself. Or you could have it at the level of the individual. One individual can cause an act can cause like a disaster if they misuse the model with the intention to harm maybe society at large, or maybe a particular group or people. So those are all I would consider dangers that come from human use of artificial intelligence. And developing bioweapons is really the most like salient of that class of issues, because it is something, developing a dangerous pathogen is something where the barrier to entry from the resource side is probably lower than it is for other types of weapons of mass destruction. Like you can imagine that if a person tries to build a nuclear weapon, they would need to refine. They would need to enrich uranium, and probably it would be easier to detect someone trying to do something like that. So so people are really watching the space of like how much models can actually assist someone to develop a bioweapon. And the kind of tests that are run, usually the baseline will be you have a person and they use Google to search up things. And so you can imagine that someone, if they're clever, they can find scattered resources on the internet that they can kind of use to progress if they're really intending to build some sort of like biological weapon. But we're seeing how much more a model can assist someone beyond that point. So models, obviously, they're trained on most of the internet at this point. And so they can kind of like recall some information that they've been exposed to in training. And then beyond that, all of them now come with tool use. Like a lot of the models come with tool use, so they can search the internet if they need to recall information, to stitch information together. So they kind of have that aspect to them. They match. They're almost like automating the process of like searching the web and piecing together the information. But then on top of that, they also pick up a lot of just general information about chemistry, and that gives them a kind of understanding, a certain know-how when it comes to the work of chemistry. And it's much like how models, even text-based models that have never seen an image or a video in their life, how they have an understanding of the visual world. If you ask one of these models, like, oh, if I stack this in this way, will it topple over or not? It can usually give you a pretty reliable answer. And why? It's because from the text data, it was able to form some representation of what the visual world looks like, how it acts. And in the same way, you can get the same kind of chemistry know-how that comes through from just reading a massive amount of chemistry-related information online, and people talking about chemical experiments and papers. So it can equip someone not just with the facts that are available online, but beyond that, it can give them that general chemistry guidance that would actually assist them in the process of actually developing something really dangerous. And so what Dario was saying in the article is that on this front, they actually have seen some dangerous trends, that the most recent frontier models actually do show do show an increase in their ability to assist someone to develop some sort of bioweapon above the baseline of just Google search. And so he talks about this. He talks about some regulation that we can have in place to work on this, to prevent something like this. But I feel like his argument is fundamentally weak because he hardly discusses something that is, I would think, is the most serious issue around this problem of bioweapons. I mean, everything he says sounds good, but obviously the most serious problem is that currently the US and China are in a competition to develop models, and the Chinese models are all open source or open weights. And the distinction here is open source is essentially you release everything about training the model, or that's at least generally the connotation of open sources. You essentially release not just the model itself, as in the weights, but you release also how you train the model, and you essentially equip someone to be able to build the same model for themselves. Whereas open weights is you don't disclose how you develop the model, but you just give the weights so that someone can download it and run it on their server. And so he doesn't really discuss this. At the time in China, currently, the Chinese models are kind of assessed to be somewhere around the 3 to 6 months behind where the frontier companies are in the United States. So that's really not that big of a gap. So if frontier models in America today are showing these worrying trends, that they are beginning to significantly assist some non-expert to help them to develop a biological weapon, that means that it will be a problem with open source models in 3 to 6 months. And so this is really at the heart of the issue, because an open weights model or an open source model are fundamentally untrackable in the same way that a closed source model is. Whenever you prompt a closed source model, that goes to, if you're going, for example, to Anthropic, it goes to Anthropic's server. So it has some idea about the company has some ability to monitor, to flag things that might be dangerous, to maybe pick up that someone's going in a dangerous direction. All these companies have pretty extensive monitoring that happens for the input prompts for dangerous signs or signals, and they can maybe modify their models or ban certain accounts, or modify their models to as they get up-to-date live information about how people are using them for potentially dangerous ends. So you can kind of control this problem for a closed source model. But for an open weights model, you have no control over that. So what does this mean? Well, if you have, say, like an open weights model, just to give you like an idea about this. So if you have like a current model, you can run the model completely, or you can run a quantized version of the model. So a quantized version of the model is all the numbers that the model is using for its calculations are truncated. So it can fit on a lighter weight GPU, on a GPU without so much memory. And so the model's performance is slightly lower, but you're able to run it on cheaper hardware. So, and so you have models can be quantized or not. They also have different sizes. So you can get open weights models that are all different sizes. The smaller end models tend to be like 7 billion parameter, or even smaller, like 3.8 billion parameter, a few billion parameter. model, and that can run on someone's laptop potentially. And then you can get larger models, the 32 billion parameter models, the 70 billion parameter models. Those are larger. Those require higher end GPUs. You can still get them to run on a consumer grade GPU if you use high quantization. If you constrict the actual numbers to just a few decimal points. So you lose a little bit of capability, but you're able to run a 70 billion parameter model on a consumer GPU. Or the largest models can be hundreds of billions of parameters. And there's they don't actually disclose their exact parameters, but it's thought that the closed source models right now are also in the high hundreds of billions to trillion potentially parameter. So here you're getting pretty close to the size of the actual models. And for those larger models, you need actually industrial grade GPUs, the H100s that everyone wants to get their hands on. But you can run a, say, 400 billion parameter model, and you can run it without any quantization if you have something like, for example, 8 H100s or 10 H100s. And the H100s are roughly 30,000 the cost. So 10 is 300,000. And of course, you need the energy to run it, and you need cooling and blah, 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 and to connect the different GPUs together. And you're not accounting for the CPU. Okay, so maybe it's slightly more, but that's still in the ballpark of a house. This is how much hardware it would take to run a really large model at full capacity without having to do quantization. So that's really not crazy that someone could collect sufficient hardware to be able to run something like this, even at the level of an individual. Just like individuals can own houses, they could own their own servers sufficient to run something like this. In fact, I do know someone that is doing that essentially has a bunch of servers in their garage, and they could run something like that locally. And you wouldn't be able to you can literally disconnect completely from the internet. And you can just serve the model on this local setup that you have, and develop your bioweapon there in the garage with all the servers, and no one would know. You'd have no way to monitor. So this is, and this here we're talking about, this is a real threat that is actually on the horizon. I mean, all the threats in this area are on the horizon, but this is in 3 to 6 months predictable threat that will come to pass if there's no action taken to prevent this. And what is the action that is needed to prevent something like this? Well, these companies need to stop releasing open weights models. They need to keep their models closed. But they have an incentive not to do that, because the Chinese companies, they know that their models are inferior. If the whole advantage of their model is that it's open source, or it's open weights. That's what gives them their competitive edge with American companies, is because people don't want to have to pay a lot of money to send have to send all their requests to some American company that, God knows what they're doing with this data. They want to have control over that themselves. And so Chinese companies, they offer that, and that's what makes them competitive. So they have an enormous, so if they continue releasing the open weights, then you're marching towards this dangerous world where you can potentially have one individual who has a few $100,000 and some patience, so that they can amass some servers in their garage and build some bioweapon. Predictably, this happens. And on the other hand, the companies have a huge incentive to keep serving the models open source. These Chinese companies have a huge incentive to continue serving these models open source and open weights, because that's the only way that they would be competitive. If they close up as well, then they lose a huge part of their appeal to the public. Then they're just serving more or less the same offering. Yeah, they could compete on price, so there is that, but they're serving more or less the same offering now as the American companies, and you get a lot less bang for your buck. The American companies are just like, their models are better, so people will just default to them in that case. So this is a danger that is on the horizon, and this is like the first test, is can we negotiate on something like this? But the more the competition heats up between America and China, the less likely that becomes. Because the Chinese state now has an incentive to do whatever it takes to allow Chinese companies to compete, especially in the AI industry. And fundamental to their ability to compete is their ability to provide these models as open weights and open source. So we're back to the old dilemma, where it's short-term interest balanced against real serious threats to humanity. And yeah, so something to think about. And we don't have a lot of time to address this issue. So it needs to be talked about and reasoned about, because this will not be an easy problem to solve. And there's more to talk about. Even if you really require only one provider to release their models open source for this to become an issue. So it needs to not only be, so it needs to actually be in some ways enforced that model providers have to serve their models only as closed models to allow for monitoring. And there are individuals out there that want open source models and open weights models, so there's a market for it. So there will be market forces that are pushing towards open source, open weights, and a lot for great reasons. They just don't want to have to give their data to some third party. They want to be able to serve the models themselves and work with those models, or use them for applications where it would be nice to have the models running locally. But so you're going to need to go against the market, and you're potentially going to need to go against the security interests of one country. So this is a fundamental challenge. Yeah, and it's like a microcosm of the larger challenge of the economic forces that are driving towards the development of this technology, even though it is very dangerous, at the risk of human security. All right. Anyways, I'll end there. I know it's a heavy topic. All the topics are heavy. I'm sorry. But yeah. Okay, so I'll end there. Thank you very much for listening, and don't forget, winter's coming. All right, take care.